A red light blinked on the dispatch operator's workstation. An emergency call was coming through. Stiffening in his desk chair, he rolled himself closer to his computer. The lanky guy, whose poofy afro swayed every time he pushed off with either foot, was an employee for the Laramie County Combined Communications Center and answered crisis calls 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Like his co-worker in the neighboring cubicle, he was an avid basketball fan and personally loved the Boston Celtics. It made things kind of awkward living in Cheyenne as a transplant who was holding true to his hometown, especially considering his team didn't have much of a shot this year. While he should have been focused on his job, he couldn't help but think about the game that was being played in Boston. It was the Celtics versus the Lakers, Fernando versus James. It had been one of the busiest nights at work ever, but all the dispatch operator was interested in at that moment were the daydreams of money filling his head. He grumbled under his breath, thinking about how trapped he felt at his 9-to-5 job. Back in Salem, he would have been home and sitting on the couch with the game on, his feet up and a six-pack in his lap. Of course, he worked a different job there, and he'd had a different kind of life, too. There was a large digital clock hanging over the call floor, and he glanced up at it, checking the time as he finally reached his workstation. Damn, it's not even 10 o'clock yet, and the lines are lighting up. It must be a full moon or something, he thought to himself, pausing to stretch out his arms and legs before he returned to the grind. So glad I only got a few more hours of this shit left. It seems like all the crazies in the city are calling us tonight. What is this? Call number 8694? I got my own problems, man. I know this is a job and it pays my rent and all, but damn, man, this is not what I thought I'd be doing all my life. Not at 42, not in fucking Wyoming. With a grunt of dissatisfaction, the dispatch operator slipped his headset on over his ears again, then pushed the microphone to his mouth. Please state your emergency, he said as he shifted in his chair again, trying to get comfortable. The seat squeaked under his weight and he sighed, reaching behind the chair for the knob to adjust the lumbar support. I gotta sit here all night, listening to people like this, and I'm not gonna take a minute to adjust my shit? Ha, yeah, right, he thought. The dispatcher had already fielded a call from someone who was watching his neighbor take a dump on another neighbor's lawn. His co-worker had just taken one from a terrified old lady who said a werewolf was rampaging downtown. He could hardly remain professional amid all the chaos. He felt his mind drifting back and forth between the two things he was really interested in tonight. He hadn't noticed or cared that he'd answered the call and delivered his line in a don't-give-a-crap monotone. His favorite basketball player, Bruno Fernando, was taking the court against LeBron James tonight in Boston. And while he knew the odds were very, very slim, part of him was elated to be able to see a fellow Angolan on television. Granted, the dispatch operator was American himself, but his grandparents were from Fernando's country, and he liked to think that the two of them shared something in common. Fuck the Lakers, the operator thought, scratching at the stubble on his chin. He needed the win for his baby's mama. Come on, God. I know you're listening up there, big guy. I need you to give my Celtics some love on the court for me right now. I know you already got your favorites. We all do. I ain't asking you to change sides for a game or a season or ever. All I'm asking is for a little grace to fall on Fernando's shoulders tonight. He silently prayed, looking at the green and white Celtics banner that was hanging from his cubicle's wall. Fernando was nothing compared to LeBron James, but the dispatcher idolized the Angolan, and he'd always been a fan of the Celtics. It didn't matter that he lived in Wyoming of all places. He decided to move there because of his little girl, and there wasn't a doubt in his mind about it being the right thing to do. That said, he knew he'd rather be playing video games and sinking hoops with his friends back home in Massachusetts, even if life had other plans. In his headset, he could hear cars honking and people cursing. It sounded as if people were running through the streets in a panic. Hello? He asked, leaning over the keyboard with his chin resting on one hand. Here we go again, he thought, as his smile faded and reality came crashing in. Another breathless caller, another bullshit crisis. Focus, dude, you have a job to do. He reminded himself with an irritated shake of his fro. He tried to pay attention to what the caller was saying. He glanced around, wondering if the assistant director was anywhere near his cubicle, but the dispatcher couldn't see Charlie Thistle anywhere. He hoped it would stay that way too. Thistle had been a bit of a prick lately, and the operator didn't want the added pressure of having the assistant director hanging around his cubicle. Hello? Is anyone there? Hey, you gotta help us over here. The caller was a male and sounded gruff, like a smoker who'd just woken up. He was enunciating like he was scared out of his mind, nearly shouting into the receiver. The dispatcher winced at the man's chosen volume. He'd wished for perhaps the 1,000th time that his headset had some kind of noise filter.
Why do they always scream into the phone like that?
What do they think? We're all deaf people to work here? Maybe I should write an opinion piece for the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle and let the public know what kind of crap we all got to deal with here, he told himself, annoyed that he had to put up with that kind of aural abuse. All right, sir, please remain calm. What's going on? He asked the caller, still bored out of his skull. There was a ringing in his ears now, and he was pretty sure that it wasn't going to fade any time soon. A fact he might have to take up with human resources, maybe earn himself a little bit of a paid holiday. The thought made him smile.
There's some kind of crazy lady smashing up the whole store,
the caller was telling him, his gruff voice turning incredulous. It was like the guy was watching it all unfold right there in front of him.
I can't believe this shit. You gotta send someone down here, man, ASAP. Y'all gotta stop her,
the caller added, verging on hysterics now. The dispatcher was hardly listening, though, as he began drifting and thinking about the basketball game again, imagining Fernando sinking a three-pointer on LeBron and seeing the GOAT's face fall. He knew it was a long shot to pull off a win, especially when it was Fernando and not one of the Celtics' former powerhouse centers.
They say LeBron's the greatest of all time.
Psst, he thought, scratching his nose.
He's a has-been, a past-the-due-date guy, like watching Larry Bird try to match skills with Kobe Bryant. Still, if there's even a ghost of a chance, I gotta believe, he reflected.
Where are you, sir? He asked the caller, glancing up at the digital clock overhead. 10:02 p.m. Time was creeping along at a snail's pace. No, scratch that. A dead, crushed snail's pace. A living snail would actually be moving, and it felt like time wasn't, not for him.
This must be what hell feels like,
he thought, getting more annoyed. He hadn't yet contacted the police, mostly because he wanted to know more about the situation first, but also, honestly, he didn't think he was going to need to.
Chances are someone else already called this shit in,
the bored dispatcher thought with a yawn. He didn't bother covering. His jaw cracked, and he rubbed his tired eyes, hearing nothing but street sounds in the background, interposed with spats of the muffled, distorted breathing coming from the caller.
Me? Wait, oh shit, sorry I tripped over a curb back there. Shit, sorry again. Yeah, the store's on West Lincoln Way. It's the early November. That crazy woman has been carrying on like 10 minutes, the caller explained, sounding like he was short of breath.
The dispatcher operator could hear the caller running, probably across a street somewhere downtown, judging by the sounds of it.
All right, so what's going on? What's this woman doing, sir?
He asked. He stole a quick glance at the clock on his computer screen, wondering if the game was over. He figured that there couldn't be more than a few minutes left anyway. The idea that he wouldn't know the outcome until tomorrow was irritating, but there wasn't much that he could do about it.
Responsibility's a real pain in my ass,
the operator thought, with an outward grimace.
What the hell is this guy going on about? I wonder what that looks like, a crazy lady being nutty in the middle of a store.
The dispatch operator imagined a dirty bag lady, maybe someone in their 60s or 70s. He knew that it was callous of him, but the hour was late, and this wasn't the first crazy person call of the night.
I told you already, she's crazy. Have you sent the cops yet?
The guy yelled in his ear, sounding like he was breathing hard and getting ready for a fight.
I'm halfway down the street, bro, and I sure as hell ain't going back there to give you a detailed fucking description, all right? Send the cops and the goddamn ambulance already, and fucking hurry.
With that, the caller hung up on him, and the dispatcher sat back in his chair, raising an eyebrow at the computer screen.
Gotta love these full moon days,
he muttered out loud, shaking his head. Then clicked an icon on his screen to open a new chat window. He began typing out a message to one of his co-workers in a cubicle 3 rows over. He briefly considered taking another quick break so that he could check the score, but halfway through typing his message, a ping in his headset announced a new call on the line.
Damn it,
he thought, finishing the message as fast as he could type. Normally, he wasn't quick at typing. But this time, though, he thought he did okay. Hopefully there weren't an awful lot of typos in there. Sorry, guy, the dispatcher thought with a heavy sigh.
What's the emergency?
He asked offhand. The high of getting yelled at during the last phone call's crisis was already fading, and all that the operator could hear was distortion in his headset. Through the white noise, he thought he could make out faint scuffling noises. It sounded like this caller was moving their phone around, possibly holding it close to their chest. But the dispatcher couldn't tell for sure.
Please, you have to help me.
The voice was female this time, sounding just as frightened as the previous caller had, breathing hard in his ear, like she was trying to rein in a hyperventilating episode. If he wasn't bored and preoccupied with the Celtics-Lakers game, he might have been slightly aroused by the noises. Shit, I gotta get out more, he told himself, grinning at his own dark sense of humour. His mind flicked to an old memory, a flashback to that famously memed tent scene in the Blair Witch Project, in which the main protagonist is giving her farewell address to the camera, with snot leaking out of her nose.
Fuck's sakes,
he thought. He nearly choked himself to stifle an inappropriately timed chuckle. He hadn't seen that movie in nearly a decade, and had no idea where the thought had come from.
All right, ma'am, tell me what's happening,
he instructed, throwing more emotion into his delivery. He'd seen the assistant director coming down his row, making the rounds, and he wanted the guy to leave him alone.
Only a few more hours, buddy,
he told himself.
I wonder if I remembered to set the recorder before I left. Did I? Or am I going to have to bug my neighbour for the password to his TSN again?
The dispatch operator had good reason to be worried, considering the amount of skin he had in tonight's basketball game. But he knew it was out of his hands anyway. And besides, he also knew that he'd still be at work long after the final buzzer blared on the court. Work had rules about streaming while on duty. Not that it mattered, of course. Not when everyone else on the floor was ignoring them. But he was trying to adhere to Thistle's protocols. And he hoped that it earned him some kind of leeway with the boss.
I need your fucking help,
the caller whisper shouted at him suddenly, jarring the dispatch operator roughly out of his own thoughts. There was a loud crashing noise in the background, and the caller's panicked breathing filled his ears again. The dispatch operator sat up straight in the chair and adjusted his headset, trying to pay attention now that the situation seemed severe.
This is certainly more entertaining than the last call,
he thought to himself callously, still picking at his nose.
Take it easy, man. Please calm down. Tell me what's happening,
the dispatcher told the caller, listening to what sounded like screaming and cursing coming from somewhere else in the background. Then glass shattered in his ears with a roar, and all the screaming got louder, more distorted. Through the sudden cacophony, he could still hear the caller breathing, loud and frantic.
Please, 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 there's something...
Whatever she'd been saying was abruptly cut off, and all he could hear afterward was hideous sounding. The operator jumped and almost fell out of his chair. Wet, slurping noises, groaning, a slow, drawn-out sort of gasp, mingling with a pain-filled plea for mercy that sounded like it was in the room with him. It scared him half to death. The very last distinct sounds the operator heard were ones of snarling and howling, and maybe something sickeningly close to feeding, too. The line had gone dead, and he knew he needed to act, but he just sat there instead, jaw open wide as he stared at his screen in horror.
Well, what the hell was that?
He thought to himself, raising a shaking hand to remove the headset. He saw the assistant director a few rows over and waved to Thistle. As much as he didn't want to talk to the man, the situation called for it.
Some kind of animal attack, maybe? A dog? A coyote? Nah, that had to have been a mountain lion or something. The way it was carrying on, he considered, watching the assistant director walking in his direction now. Jesus, Mary, and all the saints listening, help me to understand what the hell was just happening on that phone call, he begged, praying it all out in his head. He'd never really thought of himself as a religious man, but whatever was going on downtown, the woman he'd just spoken to needed someone's help. The game and his wager suddenly seemed 1,000,000 miles and a lifetime away in that moment. Much, much less important to him now than when he'd first taken that call. With shaking fingers, the dispatcher reached out to dial the Cheyenne Police Department, wondering if it wasn't already too late.